Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out here today as we discuss this very interesting book, which I just finished reading yesterday, which is about, of course, Ruben Banerjee's individual career path from being a cub reporter to his senior editorial positions. It's about his individual path, yes, but it's against the background of the very turbulent, often stormy world of Indian media, and he reflects upon that as well, and the many questions that we in the media and those of you who are consuming the media face on a daily basis. It's very engagingly done. Your story is very engagingly done, and you've used the dilemmas you have faced to raise larger questions about the media, and I'm sure many of us do have questions about the way things are running, the value system or the lack of value system in India's media right now. Ruben, for those who haven't yet read the book, who've just got their hands on it, could you just recap what happened? We know that you were the top editorial boss in Outlook. You published an article strongly critical of the government with other views as well, where you spoke about the government being missing in action during the second wave, and then you were out of a job. If you could just recap for those who haven't read the book, what happened?
So I would say this story had to be told, not because I had to defend my own honor. It was a very unfortunate ending to an otherwise glorious innings that I had in Outlook. We did discover during the height of the second COVID wave, when people were really dropping dead for lack of oxygen and medical care, and we all felt that we were abandoned at that point of time, and we said okay, let's do this cover. And we did it, but before we did it, we really didn't know. We knew that it's a very strong cover and a power-packed issue, but we never expected that it will touch such a raw nerve and it will get super viral and all. So the response to that cover took us by surprise. And things changed for me very dramatically in Outlook, very quickly. And I've said that repeatedly in this book. The first 3 years, I lasted in Outlook for 3 years, 3 months. The first 3 years, I had a great time in Outlook. I was possibly one of the rare editors in this country who faced no interference from the owners or the management. I had a free run. But post-missing, the next 3 months, it dramatically changed for me. So as I say in the book, if our civilization calendar is it's BC and AD, for me it was PM and AM, pre-missing and after missing. It changed for whatever reason, and the details are there. And then it was downhill very rapidly. And then 2 months later, we did another story, Stan Swamy died. We had to put that, we did a story on the misuse of UAPA and sedition laws across the country. It wasn't BJP-centric, Stan Swamy died on BJP's watch. But similar things were happening in Orissa, West Bengal. So we looked at that, and that also didn't go down well. The same issue, Pegasus happened. Now you can't ignore Pegasus, right? When people are under surveillance. So we had to do it, and I was told categorically that these are stories that we should stay away from.
Should stay away from. You were clearly told that.
And so I naturally asked, okay, give me clarity. What am I supposed to do? Because I expected to be told in very clear terms what I can do and what I cannot do. That didn't happen, and things went. It deteriorated very quickly, and I had to defend my honor because I think the ending was very terrible. I was sacked, fired. I went on leave for a month because I couldn't take it anymore, because I was being told that you have to fire these reporters, you have to do this, you have to do that.
You lost your freedom, your autonomy.
Yeah, I suddenly felt that I'm hemmed in from all sides. So I went on leave because I wanted to contemplate and clear my head. So my management went on record to other media websites, News Laundry and all, saying that they have approved my leave. And 1 month later, I was sacked, citing that I have gone on leave, a leave which they themselves said that they have approved. So I felt bad. Naturally, you are upset. But then the book is because of the larger story. It's not settling personal scores. There were larger issues which I thought that I must talk about.
Yes, I mean, these are very basic questions. Your editorial decisions, your thoughts of balance, your thoughts of dealing with stories that could not be ignored. You have spoken in the book about how you've always tried to show both sides. You've always tried to give a voice, even to those you may not agree with, but because they had a different point of view. You wanted to share their voice as well, to give the other side as well. You have, one may say also, you're not one of the aggressive, in-your-face journalists, as you say. You've always tried to be in the middle, be centrist, and you said that the response to that article cover was much, much more than you thought. It's a hypothetical question, but looking back now, if you had known that it would lead to all this, do you feel you would have tempered the way it was presented?
I will again do it. I will again do it.
No regrets at all?
No regrets at all. And if I think I'm unemployable now, whatever has happened, and I'll be very surprised if any owner, media owner, touches me with a barge pole after this book. But if given an opportunity, I'll again do it.
You would do it again?
Yes, I'll do it again.
Okay. So he took a very, very strong stand and paid the price for it with his job, but still no regrets.
No regrets at all.
Great. Now, you have been honest in your book about the competition, for example, with India Today. India Today was the big player where you had also worked earlier.
12 years.
And 12 years is quite substantial. And you've spoken also about how you did look at each other's covers. It did influence sometimes. You did feel bad if you'd missed something, and you knew that there was pressure on them also. And I do know also that in television newsrooms, we have every single channel is on. And there's a lot of pressure if one channel has something that the other channel doesn't have. It's a huge amount of competition. How do you think that, how much does that dictate coverage? You did speak about wanting to be different, but how much does it dictate what you
Not
cover?
really. To be very honest, I've always idolized Mr. Arun Puri. I learned my journalism during the heydays of India Today. And I'm eternally grateful to him. So I wanted to do, that was the minimum benchmark that I wanted to surpass. I set it for myself. It's never the case that Outlook management told me that you have to do better than India Today. It was never the case. But for me, I had internalized it, that that's the minimum benchmark that I must surpass.
So it was internal. It was more internal rather than saying they've done the cover, I have to do the cover. Now, the proximity to those in power is always a very big question for media people to handle, to deal with, to balance. You've spoken very honestly also about your closeness to those in power, especially in Odisha, where you worked for many years. That's a very, very difficult line. And you said you did get some feedback when the son of one chief minister felt you had betrayed him, had betrayed the family. Is it good to be so close to the newsmakers?
See, theoretically, it's all fine. You say journalists should never get close to politicians and all that. But practically, see, after all, we are human beings. You will click well with some people. You tend to become friends. You tend to socialize, right? So theoretically, it is all fine. But practically, it may not be that possible. But at the same time, we should be conscious as working journalists that where to draw a line. Like sometimes maybe we go overboard, we cross the line, but we should keep doing that. Like finally, this is our calling. Like this is what we need to do. Like I can tell you very honestly, like I have written the only kind of well-researched biography on the Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik. Now India has a history of biographers going to Rajya Sabha. You write a biography on Mayawati, you go to Rajya Sabha. You go write a biography on Lalu Yadav. Jyoti Basu's biographer went to Rajya Sabha. Now, having written biography of Naveen Patnaik, I'm 100% sure that he will not even send me to the Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation. I've actually lost friends. Okay, like, but then that is how it is. Like I had access to the Chief Minister, but then when it came down to writing the book, I took a conscious decision that I'll be as truthful as possible.
Yes, because you were very honest about it. You were honest about your proximity, the access that you have. Because sometimes for journalists, it's again, a balancing thing. Whether you say, I'm close to this person, I know this person, I have access, the temptation to show off, to say that's right. But also, you have been honest to say you had that access, because sometimes you don't want it known, that you can actually walk into somebody's house and you can...
I'm essentially a very transparent person. That is how I see it.
It is very honest, because you've also expressed your doubts. And you've also spoken... You've also quoted the critical things people had to say about you in many different contexts, which is also very, very interesting. Also, especially when it comes to your Outlook years, you've named names, you've said what people have said, you've quoted them directly. As you said, you are not an in-your-face journalist. How difficult was it to really put this out there with names rather than saying a senior editor or saying a colleague? I guess it's a question which everybody who writes an autobiography, who writes about their lives, has to face. But how difficult was it for
It
you to
wasn't
name
difficult.
names?
It came very naturally to me because this book, people might mistake it to be like I'm trying to settle scores, but this book doesn't have rancor.
Okay.
Okay, I have also been very, very grateful to the writers, and I've said this in the book. Like whatever the ending, like they were initially very, very good to me, and I've acknowledged that. So I had no malice towards anyone. Like people have good and bad. It's a mix of.
Yes.
Even I have my flaws, which I have written about. So it came very naturally because I tried to be as truthful as possible, and you have to be truthful. You have to name names. So without that, it doesn't serve the purpose.
And in your book, you describe your sometimes difficult, sometimes funny, sometimes rewarding journey from being a cub reporter, trying to get an interview, trying to speak to editors, to where you rose, to being a senior editor of many big publications. For the students who are here today, what has been your learning? Because it was difficult. It's not that you walked into a job straight from college.
I didn't have that pedigree. I had to earn every step of the way. But I strongly believe that as long as you are true to your profession, I think you'll reach the top or you'll do well.
Okay.
Like you have to be very truthful. And this is what I keep telling students, like, I think what journalism in India today needs is lessons in morality. Like moral science has to be taught because our basic principles have gone haywire. And this book, apart from whatever my journey and all, I would really like to believe that this book would be a starting point for a conversation about where journalism in India has gone wrong. And I have very strong views about it. And I have journalist friends, old colleagues who some of them I'm meeting after 10, 20 years. They may disagree with me, but I have very strong views, and I'm pretty disappointed with the way journalism is being practiced in this country. And if I can, give me 2 minutes. I'll not get a platform like this, so I better say it now. Like we all know what Godi media does, and so that let's not even discuss it. But I am possibly equally disappointed with the other section of the media, because journalism has been replaced by hysteria. Okay, like it's very hysterical, and so I'm not comfortable with that. And there is no conversation happening. Like there is no middle ground. Either you are for them or you are against them. And I have a basic problem when, like, it's generally been now, we have come to accept that to be a good journalist, you have to be essentially anti-Modi. I find this crazy. Like, say, BJP, I have not voted for BJP. I don't like BJP, but it's a legitimate party, recognized party, and they have won legitimate elections. I may hate that fact that BJP has won. So there is an Indian citizen has every right to vote for BJP. So someone votes for BJP, does it mean that he cannot be a good journalist? No. Being pro-Modi or anti-Modi shouldn't be the yardstick of becoming a good professional journalist. Instead, what the benchmark should be, whether you are pro-truth or post-truth. Truth is something that we should be determining whether we are good as journalists or not anti-Modi or pro-Modi.
And you feel it has come down to that? Because
it has come down to that.
I do agree that many of the most respected voices on both sides are the ones who take extreme views.
Extreme views.
Do you feel that there is no space now for a journalist, perhaps such as yourself, who wants to present both sides, who sees, you see yourself as in the center? Do you think it has to be, it's now become you're with us or against us?
Exactly. Like there is this talk, like people say, like these very famous journalists, they say that this is the time to have moral clarity. And clarity is being anti-Modi or pro-Modi. But then who decides what is moral clarity? Like there has to be a conversation, right? You have to represent both sides of the views. And as long as I'm okay with it, as long as you don't incite violence or you are plain abusive, like every view should be represented. And then as an editor, you are free to take your editorial stand.
Okay.
And then the reader decides, because you have given both sides. And then the reader decides that whether you are right or wrong. So I still believe that we should be pro-truth, the best obtainable version of the truth, and keep doing it, and not be so hysterical as we are today.
And the best obtainable version of the truth is by listening to many different truths, many different views.
Absolutely.
Because one of the points you mentioned in the book is about the terrible attack on students in JNU, where students were injured, they were set upon, they were injured, and you did include an article from one of the students who had been hurt, but you also included a right-wing view of people who said that the students who were hurt were actually the instigators, that they were the ones who were at fault. And interestingly enough, you allowed your junior colleague to actually critique you for that, to be critical of you in the magazine. What his point is a point which many would have, especially those of extreme views. Why are you giving them space?
Platform. Yes, that exactly. And I'm still very fond of that junior reporter who went against me and did that critique. And he's a very fine writer, and it so happened that his critique, like it's very unusual for a reporter to take his own editor and the same platform through the cleaners, right?
And still keep a job.
Yeah, and that story got picked up by Washington Post.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so I was elated. A lot of my friends, my colleagues said, oh, what is this happening? Like, the editor has been critiqued, and I said, fine, it's all fine. And 3 days later, I wrote my own rejoinder.
Okay.
And I'm still very fond of that reporter. He did the right thing. And now he's threatening to critique my book. I said, please go ahead.
Something to look forward to. He
Yes,
did not
absolutely.
mince his words.
Yes,
He did not
absolutely.
mince his words. But as you said, like, you have quoted people who've been very critical of you. That is really the point which I think, which is at the crux of the debate here, is both sides. You don't have to be one side or the other. And I think it's, especially for the younger students here, you do, of course, have a personal opinion. You do vote. You do react. Has the journalist become a crusader? Is there a difference? Like, we join journalism, hopefully, most of us, with a sense of moral values, with a sense of wanting to clean up the world and make things better. But has a respected journalist now become a crusader?
I think
and is there a difference?
I think every newsroom has become politicized.
Every single newsroom.
Yeah, almost. There might be 1 or 2 exceptions. And most newsrooms have become very, very politicized. And the moment you become politicized, you are divided. So you are taking sides, you are becoming an activist, you are on that side or this side. And that conversation is not happening anymore. Like, I'm not discounting the work that any of these journalists are doing. Like, some of them are very brave and courageous, and the amount of risk they are taking is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I won't have that degree of courage. But I have that essential difference with their approach. Like, we have taken a position and then we'll launch into a tirade. We'll be very vicious, vitriolic.
Yes.
You can say all that. Like, I'll be very honest. Like, my time in Outlook was definitely an eye-opener for me, because I was number 2, number 3 in other organizations, senior, but I was never the number 1.
Yeah.
The moment you become the number 1, it opens up a whole new dimension, because you actually are in the hot seat and you are dealing with pressures, calls,
The buck
threats.
stops here.
The buck stops, and then you get late night calls.
Yes.
You get exposed.
Where
to a lot
earlier
many
you might
things.
have had a buffer between you and the
Yeah,
complaints.
exactly. So it opened it up, and I thought that the story needs to be told, because we all know that the business model of media is broken.
Yeah.
We know that the ownership structure of media is very badly distorted. But then the learnings that I had to share. And see, any time, like, if you ask me, I have no regrets. Okay, wear it as a badge of honor. But given a chance, I would prefer to be a working journalist than being an unemployed martyr. I would like to keep my job. But having lost my job, I think it worked out. There is a positive also to every side, everything that happens. It allowed me to write my memoir.
Okay, yes.
And otherwise, you would not have bothered to read my memoir. Who is Ruben Banerjee? Nobody cares. Not only have you read it, we are discussing.
Yes.
And even people like Samar and Dr. Ram Gua is sitting here, and Rajiv Gowda. So I think there is a huge positive to it.
Yes, and you've been able to examine your own thoughts and your own
exactly.
beliefs.
Yeah. So there was a definite positive, but then the cost has been very high.
The cost has been high, because I do agree, because there are different kinds of journalists and different kinds of journalistic approaches. It may be too idealistic, but meeting hate with hate is not always the best way to do it. If you are as aggressive or opinionated as the one you're trying to debate with,
then you are not conversing, and then it leads you nowhere. Like, this is a kind of a dead end, like it's a deadlock, right? Neither are they going to change, and neither you are going to change. And you are also, see, unless you are having both sides a conversation, you end up preaching to the choir, right? So on, say, the websites are hugely popular, and I follow them, I read them,
Yes.
I love them. But are they converting people to their, no, they are only essentially, it's their echo chamber that
Yes,
are consuming.
yes,
So
yes, yes.
finally, at the end of the day, it doesn't really make much of a difference. You are not converting any Modi bhakts to your side, right? Are you?
That's absolutely. So now we'll expand it a little further. This journalist who has tried to be in the center is now center stage for the views he tried to express or the allowed other people to express. So we are, in fact, going to ask other two journalists to join us, Samar Halarnkar and Dakshin, if you could come on. So I'm really delighted to have the three of you here to discuss the present status, the present values, the present lack of values, the present situation of the media in India. And to start with, really, it's what we were discussing. Can you be a central journalist? Can you exist with both sides journalism? Or is that something that has passed? Do you have to take a stand? Samar?
I agree with Ruben about the whole question of taking extreme editorial stands. I disagree with him about the fact that you do not have to go to either sides, but you should not. What you should be truthful to is the truth, data, and facts. I think this we do very little of in Indian journalism. The discussion I heard until now was mostly about opinions that people held. But I think, especially at a time like this, you need to go much beyond that.
Yes.
When you portray the facts, it's as simple as that. For example, what are the few things that we know, for example, for definitely have changed after Mr. Modi took over? You may be a Modi supporter, you may not be. But the facts, some things don't change. For example, the number of attacks on minorities, have they gone up? Yes, they have. Has there been the number of increase in the number of sedition cases filed? Yes, there have, very clearly. We run a database on that, which has now been quoted in the Supreme Court. After which the Supreme Court actually has stayed the law on sedition. Have the number of UAPA cases gone up? Yes, according to the government's own data, that we have yet to sit and examine that freely. So there are some things that are factual, data based, and I think that is something that we need to look at clearly. Opinions always have their own place, and that is fine. Editorial writers can write opinion. Where I take issue with this is the fact is that journalists need to focus very much more on data, reportage, and opinion, and than opinion. Yeah.
Isn't the data, though, that you're looking at, or the subjects you're looking at, also very subjective? Would that also be?
Always. But when you're looking at, when you are examining a government, there are certain parameters that you need to look at. For example, as I said, are there an increase in number of criminal cases being filed against journalists? Very clearly there is. There is some reason why a variety of indices show that this is that clearly has been. I mean, we have colleagues, I have friends, I have a friend who's been in jail now for the 122 days. And there is no criminal offense registered against this, and others as well. I'm just taking him as an example. There is no criminal offense. The offense is journalism. It's as simple as that. For doing both sides of the story. Yes, or for reporting the government side and reporting the other side as well. It's as simple as that. So where then is the extreme position that people are taking? Right? That's a fact.
Getting into trouble for stating the other side as well.
So we have to recognize there certainly have been changes in India. You may be a supporter of Mr. Modi, you may not be a supporter of Mr. Modi. You look at the facts. It's simple as that.
Dakshin, do you think both sides journalism still works? Because we have, as Samar was saying, seen people get into deep trouble by quoting somebody who the authorities don't like, by giving another point of view.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. Just before that, so that he can take it from there. Your own reporter, Rubinda, Salik Ahmed, I think his name was, who wrote a really fine column, and is terrific, as Ruben said, that he allowed him to do that, which is fantastic. This is the kind of approach we need to journalism. But what was his objection with that column? His objection with that column was not the fact that as to who had written it, was the fact that there were untruthful things that were not factual.
There were inaccuracies
in there,
not the point of view.
Those need to be called out, and I think we are in the time of journalism where if something like that goes into a column, and I think this is done sometime in some parts of the Western world as well, that you call those out and tell the opinion writer, this is not factual. Would you like to correct it? What should exactly? So,
Dakshin, I mean, like, if you're presenting the other point of view may not be the truth. It may be an opinion. Can we go with that?
Let me take off on what Samar is saying. You know, for me, if I look at journalism today, I mean, I think we must really I think we need to take a step back and look at journalism itself. I think journalism, figuratively, is like a boat in a storm. It really doesn't matter which side of the boat you're sitting, right? The entire field called journalism itself, I think, is in grave danger from forces which are not journalistic in some ways, because we are talking of journalism in a sense. You know, we're also within a bubble. Okay, now you have social media, you have anyone who puts up a whatever kind of information on WhatsApp or Facebook, or it just becomes news, it gets discussed. We don't know who has put it up, we don't know what is the factual basis of it, you can't deny it, you can't, you know. So what is happening is that there is a real and serious threat to journalism. Okay, I think I see it that way. I think you have to really step back and look at the whole area of journalism. So all-side journalism is, of course, obviously, I mean, like, that's the way it should be. Everybody needs to be given a chance. But I'm saying we must also look at how to safeguard what we have, because I think there is also a lot of taking for granted that's happening. It's been about 72 years since we got independence. I think people have really got used to democracy. They're taking it for granted. We don't realize that there is a gradual encroachment of
gradual
democracy.
erosion.
I may be I may leave the house to go buy a banana. I may get arrested on the way for doing that. It's almost like that. Somebody goes to report a story, and today he's in jail for how many? I mean, for months on end. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's not a question of stepping back, maybe running away.
I mean, what are we talking about? I mean,
Ruben, giving the other point of view when it's not factual or when it's not accurate, and maybe when it arouses hate, maybe when it causes division.
Now the problem is, I fully agree with what Samar says, and data is something like, point is, not all of us are equipped to study data, read data. Like they did, Article 14 did this marvelous piece which a big newspaper stole without even giving you credit. This sedition, right? Data is very, very important, and one of the best books in recent times that I've read is that data book, Half Truths and Numbers, Rukmini's book. It's so good, fascinating book. But unfortunately, not all of us have that training or the expertise to read data. Data is fine and we should be, and I fully agree. But then say, as long as it is not abusive, or now who determines what is true or what is not true? Right? How do you determine? I would say carry both sides and then call it out. Say, I feel that what you are arguing is not true.
That is
Otherwise, it would amount to censoring.
Yeah, and censorship works both ways.
And censorship can work both ways. Like, I'll cancel you, you'll cancel me. Right.
That has been a question which has been on my mind many times during the journalism career. When you talk about, if I can say, the rubbish some people speak, we have some excellent examples here in Karnataka where people are spouting hatred. I'm talking like maybe Mutalik or Anand Kumar Hegde. They say things which are divisive, which are bigoted, which are communal. And initially our response was to report it. This person said this, hopefully in the context of calling them out, like you said, of saying this is what an MP is saying. But I'm increasingly feeling, do we give them that space? Do we give them that oxygen of publicity? I know that every single thing that Mutalik says, do we report it and then refute it? Are we not, with both sides journalism, or giving everybody a viewpoint, having the danger of putting out a view which could be?
So it's a very thin line. So you'll have to take a call. Like, I don't think you can define or you can have a ready formula for how you deal with all these people.
Yeah.
But editorially, we need to keep calling them out.
You have to keep
very, very strongly
it on,
that call them out. Keep calling them out.
Now, you gentlemen you've been in print for many years. You've been online now. It's a very different world. I'm coming from a different space. I'd like to get your views. The way television news is now in India, will it survive? Will it last? Is it over?
No, it will survive and it will flourish, simply because people are consuming the rubbish that we are being fed. So there's no question that it will survive, and there are now only a handful of honorable exceptions, your channel being among those. But for the rest of it, and it's not just the national rabble-rousing television channels, every state now, I mean, Karnataka is a classic example. I mean, Half the channels, most popular channels, are rabble rousing, and the kind of stuff that appears there does not even qualify as news, doesn't even qualify as journalism. So to come back to the point that Ruben had mentioned about um, uh, living in your bubble, you know, it's very true. But the point is, it is very difficult now, and that has been scientifically proven, to get people out of that bubble. Whatever you say, even fact does not. So we are, in fact, not so much as a truth or post-truth world. We're in a post-fact world where people, even if you give facts to them, they are not going to be convinced. So that, and what is the solution to that, and what is journalism's role in that? I have no idea. My only view, and I'm asked this often, certainly at our workplace, that does this make any sense what we're doing? So my only point is that you have to keep at it, because at some point you have to keep going, and at some point, and you have to engage with people on social media, because social media is where people are at.
It's just so huge.
Yeah. So I am an old style, journalist. I've been for more than 3 decades in journalism, but and I still read 4 on weekends, 5 newspapers or 6 newspapers in the morning, and I read all of them right through, every page 7, column 6, etc. But the fact is, other people are not reading. Everything comes down to social media. It's if you have to get the attention of someone during the endless scroll, and you have to stop people there. So journalism has been completely redefined. And what are the answers? We don't know. We're all trying to figure out.
Like as you said, not many people sit down with the daily newspaper anymore.
So
not people sit down for the evening news anymore. It's not. It's they consume it as and when they want to. Dakshin, we're also told in television as well, get it on the web first. Do your web copy first, then deal with the television story. Do you see television surviving? Do you sit and watch a bulletin in the evening?
Well, I just see half an hour of news of one television channel, which is, obviously yours. So otherwise, I don't, because it's too much of talking, too much of, discussion. I think it just leads nowhere, at the end of it.
Empty debate.
And also today, what has happened is that the exposure to news is so much that you can read news virtually from anywhere in the world. So the options are also many. So you try to look at the best that you can look, and then try to see that you use the time in the best possible manner.
Is there a greater freedom online? Both of you worked to set up the Jazeera English online. Is there a greater freedom online?
Yeah, there is. There's definitely quite a lot of freedom. I don't see much pressure, at least in where we work.
Ruben, do you think online is freer than print or TV? No.
During my 3 years, 3 months, I have had instances where Outlook website carried a story and caused me a lot of grief. Phone calls. So, see, it depends on, like, I'm 100% sure, like, whether it doesn't matter whether it's print or online. If that story, and I don't know what is the formula, why that missing cover became so super viral. If you are under the radar, it's fine. But if online or print or TV, it blows up, and the powers that we are not happy with it, then there is problem. So,
you speak in your book of being quite happy about being under the radar with Outlook.
Because see, as again I said, because I was in the hot seat, once you are responsible for your team, it's not just the journalism that you are doing. So you are responsible for their livelihood, their children going
salaries.
to school. I need to protect their jobs because families, kids are. So when you take a larger picture. Now I know, like in this book I have narrated, like I had to go and meet Yogi Adityanath twice. Now people might say, oh, you went and met Yogi. So how could that be? But then I had to, because I had to take a larger picture, right?
You spoke about this 70 lakhs of advertising.
70 lakh rupees, and at the end of the day, people will get salary. So you have to draw a line. But then let's be very honest. I told Yogi ji, he was very nice. He gave me barfi and all that. He comes across as very decent and nice. Like I believe he is. And I did tell him that Yogi ji, in my broken Hindi, Yogi ji kuch karunga, coverage dunga, but illegal kuch nahi karunga. And he nodded. So,
Samar, you mentioned social media. It has, of course, come into our lives, especially like you said, as old-time journalists. It's just come and changed the way the world consumes information or fake news. How much pressure has it put upon journalism, real journalism in India today, both in terms of fake news, having to counter it, having to deal with it, and also in terms of the pressure, the trolling, the hatred that people face online when they put forward a view which is not appreciated by perhaps the majority?
So I think the question of how you deal with trolls depends on person to person. For example, it doesn't affect me that much. If I get abused, I just kind of, I find it quite amusing and let it pass. But there are, of course, people who face far more serious trolling abuse. And then when it comes from the virtual world into the real world and cases are filed against you, that is where then the problems begin. And you can, and there are, and of course, there are many people who who do not deal with the trolling well. I have colleagues who have, have a lot of mental issues and struggle how to cope with it, etc.
It's a constant barrage of
It's a
hatred
constant
and threats,
barrage, yeah,
threats as
absolutely.
well.
So things have, in that sense, changed a lot. So how do you cope with it? I mean, everyone has their own way of coping, but now I think it is very important to sometimes get medical help. I mean, certainly, and for younger people.
There's no shame in admitting that the pressure is there.
Yeah, but I'd also like to mention something that Ruben has mentioned often. I think the biggest issue that we're all struggling with as journalists in the modern era is the fact that the mainstream media, as it were, the legacy media, are still in the hands of industrialists and people with deep pockets, and they are the ones who are under more pressure than ever. So I should say that they have. It's not a question that they have never been under pressure, and that this came only after Modi. That was never the question. My last 3 jobs, I've had to quit. And 2 of those were before Mr.
3 jobs in a row.
Yeah, 3 jobs in a row, and the first 2 were before Mr. Modi took office as Prime Minister. Also, if you recall, and I think Ramgo as an audience, he can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was Jawaharlal Nehru who first talked about the influence of the jute press, because there were jute barons who used to control all the press from the Times of India or everything. So that pressure in India has always been there, and that is because, as Ruben says in his book, because of the business model of Indian journalism, where they have other interests, and there a small part of it is the media, and the one that is easiest dispensable when there's times of trouble is the media.
It may be prestige, but it's not cash.
Absolutely, the media is easiest dispensable, which is why he was out of a job, which is why as he says, people like us are unemployable. So that is a basic business model. That there's a problem with the basic business model of the media.
Is it the business model which is causing the rot totally? Because, of course, like I know when I was a journalism student and I suddenly discovered, hey, media, the newspapers, the television need to make money. It's not all about the truth and putting it out there. They also need to pay salaries, and television news is very, very expensive. And it's kind of like, okay. It's also a business which needs to run, which needs to maybe cater, give the audience what they want, like you mentioned earlier. Is it the business model that is at fault here? Because we do have independent websites. We do have your own, Article 14. We do have the Federal, which, and many of them, like the News Minute, there are lots of times at the end of an article, you'll see that appeal. So if you like this article, if you want to support journalism, fund us, help us. Can we fix journalism with fixing the business model?
I think it's going to go really a long way. I think people have just got used to getting either news free or at a highly subsidized rate, and I think people should, if real journalism or real democracy has to be practiced, it has to definitely be independent, and people should start paying for news. Should start subscribing to all the independent websites.
Media people need to be paid, even if it's not paid media. They need the money. They need the money. Absolutely. Your thoughts on this? Can we clean it up with?
No, it's easier said than done, because we were going through tremendous financial stress in Outlook, and we in Outlook, we were the first. Like, in fact, I got my friends there. There's a startup, so basically you pay per use. You pay 5 rupees, 3 rupees for every story.
Yes.
But then the problem is, like, even a lot of people talk about subscription model, like you get subscribers. But then the problem is, we are not New York Times. So each media house,
you don't have Wordle.
You need to have that volume. Like, you need 1 lakh subscribers to be viable.
To make it viable, yes.
But what's happening is, at the end of the day, we are ending up with 5,000 or 10,000 subscribers. So the money you make does not even cover 5% of your costs.
Okay.
But then that's the way to go. So maybe at some point, like New York Times has monetized it very smartly. Like, even their puzzle, Wordle, all that has been monetized. Like, we'll have to do it, but it hasn't been.
It hasn't been done.
It hasn't
happened. Paying for what you consume, your feeling has to be the model going ahead. If I can ask, your website, where's your funding from? Is it advertising?
No, we are a for-profit, so we cannot take donations and we cannot take anything also. And that is set up specifically like that for regulatory reasons, because for We hope, of course, that there will be lesser scrutiny because of for-profit, which of course may not prove to be the case. But so where's the funding? That's a good question. So we have survived largely on doing contracts. You know, somebody says, "Can you do a study for us on so and so?" That's how we have survived. We have content commissioning agreements with a couple of people, and that is how we get by. But but this is not a. It's a business model that, like many others, we are trying to figure out. Has it worked? It's allowed us to stay in business, but at a very basic level. And very often, you know, we have just stopped payments because there is no more money in the bank. We're like down to 5 to 10,000 rupees. At least once in 2-3 months, it comes down to that. It's as simple as that.
You really need people who are committed to
Yeah,
work.
we have no full-time employees. We have about 5 part-time employees, and they are told, including myself, that you know, get your money from elsewhere. We'll pay you some money, and the rest of your salary you get from elsewhere.
Compared to, like you said,
Yeah,
legacy
so-
media, older media. At one stage, I know that
Yeah.
NDTV had 1,500. I mean, there were thousands.
Yeah.
There were lots
But
of
the
people.
good news I would say is that there's any number of really good talented reporters out there. There's no question of that, who are willing to write. And if you simply pay them, and we cannot pay them the kind of money that we would like to, but the fact that we pay them within, for example, we say that we will pay you within 48 hours of your voucher landing up with us.
That is
And we do that. And we didn't realize that this was actually something that they welcomed, and that's why many people choose to write for us. May not be because of what we are, but because of the fact that we pay promptly.
Yes, the chasing of payments.
Yeah,
from
they
these
said
freelancers.
if you go to a larger legacy media house, we have to chase our payment sometimes for 5-6 months.
to get
And here, you know, the first thing we do is make sure we are there paid.
How does federal stay afloat? How do you get your salary?
The Federal is part of this huge media group called the New Generation Media. So it's a Tamil media. It's Pudhiya Thalaimurai. You know, it's a top channel in Tamil Nadu. So it's part of that. So
You
we
have
don't really
deep
have an
pockets.
issue
You
as
have
far as
deep
money is
pockets
concerned.
right
But
now.
at the same time, we also keep a section as a payment thing, just to also make sure that we are trying hard to kind of get away from the dependence and But then it's an experiment, and I must say it hasn't really worked all that well. I mean,
Now, till such time as we do find a magic wand where people are ready to pay for the news they consume, the fact remains that it's still very largely ad-driven. It's revenue-driven. It's ads from the government, which some channels don't
Let
get
me
at all.
just correct you. The people are not going to pay.
They're not going to.
They are not
They're
going to pay because
It's not
they're
something
used
you
to
can-
free content, and in India particularly
Yeah.
so. They are not going to pay.
So that is
They're
not
only
viable,
those who
that
are
is not-
ideologically committed to what you're doing
Yes.
and support what you're doing. They will
Like
pay.
a donation. Like a
Absolutely,
donation.
like a donation. That's it. They are not going to pay.
So that will
because the
never be a valid that-
because the news evermore is going to become free. There's no
Okay.
question about that. So you have to find out where you're going to make your money from.
So in that case, if it is largely advertising and where numbers count so much, then it will be catering to the easy way out, what the people want. Like, for example, that the media circus after poor Sushant Singh Rajput died, that is what the people want. And we saw the depths, the barrel being scraped. It was awful. It was an embarrassing time to be in the media in India. Won't that happen? Can we then blame the audience? Can we then say this is what they want? We are giving them what they want.
It's a vicious cycle, and I think he's right. Like scaling up this model is going to be very difficult. Like there are websites which I am kind of great follower. Like I like News Laundry or News Minute.
Yeah.
They're very good sites.
And they end their articles with help us, send us money.
But then to scale it up, like News Laundry, I guess I don't know them intimately, but I guess it's a small team.
Yes.
Like, okay, they are getting subscribers, but can they, like if you have a big setup, can you do it? You can't do it. Like you will not be able to get that volume. So I guess editors will have to keep visiting Yogi Adityanath.
I met once a Romanian journalist while I was at Harvard, and a very well-known investigative magazine they ran at that point of time. And they were financially all right.
Yes.
So they had a decent business model. So there were 15 of them paid full time. So I said, how do you sustain yourselves? He said, we write ad copy. I said, but you're all investigative reporters. He said, yeah, we're all hardcore investigative reporters, but we write ad copy. So that he said the advertisement, the revenues they get from writing ad copy and working like an ad agency funds the journalism, which is perfectly fine. So I think all over the world now with online media, everybody is in search of the business model that works.
Something
so
that works. You mentioned that in your book also about the stringers, the people in the local areas who are
So what has
busy at
happened,
getting
like, for
ads.
people who haven't read the book as yet, Now, because everyone is cutting corners, like so, I happen to be a big newspaper, and I went to state. So I was in one small town, and because I was there, four, and now they are journalists, but they are now designated as sources, not even stringers. So they each one of them have a card says so and so source. Okay, so why this? Because they're basically essentially circumventing that Working Journalist Act. You don't have to pay that minimum whatever, and you get a card as a source. And
So you have
basically
your
you go
status in
around
your
and
area.
blackmail and get contractors and local ads and all
Yeah.
that, like Shadi ka ad, iska birthday card, whatever. So it's a free for all there, and I don't blame these stringers. Like they are on the front lines, right? And they get they are the ones who get killed and beaten up and all that. And so what kind of protection have we given? We don't even give them money, so obviously they'll have to leave, right? So I don't blame them.
We've had people in smaller towns in Karnataka saying that they were from NDTV when they weren't, and
No.
threatening and blackmailing, like you said, which didn't.
I have had one instance where I went to meet someone and said, "What? You are Ruben Banerjee? Ruben Banerjee just met me an hour back."
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I'm from NDTV, but NDTV was here earlier. No, they, that kind.
No, about the point about giving what people want, I think it's the biggest myth, because there's really nothing, there's no way of knowing what people want.
It's not a good enough
It's
excuse.
just a nice excuse to do whatever we feel like doing. That's Sushant Singh Rajput and going on, and the TRP is going up. I think it's all it's all a little bit of
But while there are,
hocus pocus.
but there are many questions, of course, about TRPs and the way they're done. But the fact is, the numbers seem to be there. People do seem to be watching, even if it's to watch and say, "Do you know what happened last night on that particular channel, which I will not name?" It's like even if it's something like that, people are watching.
The point about giving what people want, we've heard this even before, it predates television. And it justifies whatever you do, because you end up saying, no, this is what people want and we're doing it. But these are all just, I think, lame excuses, myths, which have just been there with the feel, justifies whatever you do, whether it's right or wrong. And, life goes on. That's
Your thoughts, Samar, on this?
on the question of giving people what they want, well, I mean, if you're, say, for example, if you're at Times now, of course you give people what you want. But otherwise, I definitely don't think you should be giving as journalists what people want. You should give them what you think they should know.
Even if it means lower numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about that. That's
No
what,
ad revenue from Yogi
no ad
Adityanath.
revenue. Yeah, but I mean,
No ad revenue from Yogi Adityanath.
yeah, absolutely. I just want to very quickly, just if I may, just quickly change it and refer a bit to what both of you all were talking about earlier. Is the whole question of a specific journalistic tool of access. Now, access overall, that is one thing that has happened in the post-Modi era, and not just Modi, but all across in every state. That access has come down to people in power. You refer to the fact that when you were in India today, Naveen Patnaik, Chief Minister of Odisha, did not particularly seem to like you, but he gave you access because you were India Today's man there. And we have all experienced this working for India Today in that so-called golden era. Now, but that access also leads to things that you could never get otherwise. For example, in his book, he talks of Giridhar Gamang, a former Chief Minister of Odisha, and how when the super cyclone was about to hit Odisha, he mentions, and obviously I think he was there or he knew somebody who was there, that the Chief Minister was sitting in a room with 3 tantrics. One tantric said that and this is how he was dealing with the cyclone. So one tantric said, if the cyclone comes, it's going to hit your chest and it's going to go off, something like that. The second one said it's going to go above your and Odisha's head, so there's no
Orissa will be
problem.
spared, yes.
And the third one said, if I remember right, correct me Ruben if I'm wrong anyway, that it will spare Odisha and one will hit Andhra Pradesh and one will hit West Bengal. So I think Giridhar Gamang thought, okay, we are mostly all right, and had a decent sleep, and of course Odisha was devastated after that. But those kind of stories only come with access. Do you feel that access has been cut off for many journalists?
Access is a problem now. Like, see, the problem is like earlier politicians of say 20 years or 30 years, they would give access and they want a friendly press. Now, the politicians who give access, they just don't want objectivity or anything, neutrality. They want 200% loyalty. That's the problem. Present-day politicians are expecting 200% loyalty. That is where the problem
Yes,
is. And the
earlier-
moment you are not loyal to that degree, they'll cut you off.
Earlier, many people were happy just to come on air.
Yeah.
Even if they were facing the hard questions, they were on air and they could tell their voters, look, I'm there. But now that has changed because of the number of media outlets. And also, like you said, some channels do not get access, and it works both ways. It does work both ways.
And also let's look at it this way: that today a politician does not need to have a press conference, does not need to meet a journalist. You can directly come on Twitter and say whatever you want, or maybe say a man ki
So
baat.
the need is less.
Yeah.
They need not be so. It works both ways. Like I remember during the CAA protest when we were covering it in Bangalore. I once went to town hall when there was a pro-CAA rally being led by young Tejasvi Surya, and didn't feel comfortable. I took off my mic, but people knew who I was, and they began saying, "Go back to Pakistan," and they began gathering, and I retreated. I didn't just step back. I moved away. Similarly, the Republic reporter at that time, when she went before an anti-CAA protest, she was abused and sent away. So it does work both ways. But access is really a huge issue. I mean, this is a government where the Prime Minister doesn't hold press conferences, where the questions are not being taken, even abroad. Questions are not being taken. So access is an enormous issue, you know. So even with the debates, the sometimes meaningless debates which go on, you don't necessarily have the biggest voices, depending on where you are as a platform. So what do we do?
Indeed.
What do we do?
What the answer is to that. I think that will probably means that you have to work so much harder. I mean, certainly we see it with our reporters that when they go, and you obviously always have to get the opinion of whoever, the chief minister, the minister in charge, the local district commissioner, etc. And very often now we find, especially in many of the northern states, it's much actually easier in the south, that from the local SP, DC onwards, many of them just will not come on the line at all. At all.
They're not authorized
Yeah,
to speak.
so this means that the journalist has to work much harder. And obviously now is the template. You will try to contact everyone up the road repeatedly. And tell the reader how you have tried to contact. But this is actually quite ridiculous because they should be getting telling you what's going on.
The person on the ground, the SP on the ground should be able to tell you. But it is, I think it's part of the whole thing of closing up and getting into trouble for saying things. I think it's all that. We will be opening the floor for questions soon. I just wanted to say it. We have, I think, taken a darker view of what goes on. For those who are entering the field of journalism, is there hope? Is there hope? Should they just pack their bags and become chartered accountants? What do you think, Dakshina?
I mean, the point is to fight. I mean, the point is there's going to be pushbacks, or there are going to be blocks in many different ways. It's not just journalism. Journalism is because we are discussing media today, but you have similar problems in all other fields. I mean, there's an overall crisis. Let's not forget that. So I mean, there's really no escape. It's either this or that. So journalism is good.
Do you feel it's still a good field for?
I get a lot of kick out of journalism. So I wouldn't think of
as well as kicks.
So be prepared to get sacked at some point of time. So that's all right.
It's part of your portfolio.
But my just one line, I would like to tell you that my mantra in life has been never compromise whatever you believe in, but you make some adjustments. Adjustments is not compromise.
Okay, that's a thin line. It's a thin line. You have to sleep well at night, but you have to survive.
You are a Bangalorean, Ruben. We all adjust all the time.
ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ adjust ಮಾಡಿ. Samar, is there hope for them? People stepping into the field now. We've been there a long time.
No, there certainly is hope if you believe but you have to believe in what you're doing, because otherwise it's going to be extremely difficult. And I disagree a bit with the fact that it's in other professions as well. It's not as much. You can try to act like nothing else is going on, because certainly in your bubble and a social media feed, if you choose not to get involved, I have lots of friends who have no idea. The other day I was talking to someone who was reasonably well read, etc. And then I said, we're talking about cases under the UAP. I talk about how sedition law has been stopped by the Supreme Court. Then he said, I said, but there's always the UAPA. So he said, what's the UAPA? So,
the awareness
is very low, But to answer your question, yes, you should. If you're convinced this is what you want to do, then please be sure that you need to have a really strong backbone, and you need to be extremely strong about what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Maya, just let me give an example. If you leave aside journalism, you take CA for instance, chartered accountancy. You have an issue with the CA Institute is getting taken over by a different organization. They're trying to dilute the the powers of the CA Institute. That's one thing. If you take the area of medical education, there's so much of confusion because there's going to be a complete change in the way things are going to happen in the next maybe 2-3 years down the line, because the last year of your MBBS exam is also going to be the entrance test for your PG. and this is causing a lot of confusion. It's called Next, N-E-X-T. So every area has a problem. So it's not just
No
journalism.
escape. No escape. So no pressure on all you young journalists, but you have to go out there and fix Indian media. No pressure. Now we'll take questions. I'm sure there are questions here for the panel. Yes, I think is there a mic over there?
Hi, I'm former journalist. All of you spoke on facts and opinions and data and everything. All that is very fine. But right now, and for a few years now, there is a not very discreet effort to drown out the matters that actually matter with a whole lot of nonsense. The like digging of land here and there, and it seems to be happening at an increasing frequency. So as editorial heads, how do you kind of manage that? I mean, it's happening, you cannot ignore it, but you know that when you discuss something that's clearly nonsense, you are acknowledging it as well. So how do you sort of keep the news that matter at the forefront while also telling people that what is happening here, I mean, it's happening, but you shouldn't be focusing on it. I mean, this is a distraction at best.
See, basically, like this digging, that's a story you can't ignore. Right or wrong, places are being dug up, and I don't know how many shivlings will be found. So you can't ignore. But if I had my job, I think I would not have done it as a cover. I would have had it inside, and I had a more like, say yesterday this gentleman got killed in Bhopal just because someone suspected he was a Muslim. A lot of Muslims are leaving this country. They are actually leaving. They are closing down their establishments. People who can afford. I think that's a story which is waiting to be done on the cover. And there are very many such important issues that one need to look at. So I'll cover it, but I'll not blow it out of proportion. I'll leave it for the right-wing media or whatever they do.
So in the area of multimedia, there's no inside cover and all that. So the story will be dealt with because it's a story and it has to be reported. But then you also try to give all sides to it and ensure that there are contrary views to what's happening or what the court is saying in some more detail. So you try to work up as much sense into the story as possible, because what you're basically, like you say, dealing with something which for many people is basically is a non-issue.
In fact, I was telling Dr. Guha, like, if I was still the Outlook editor, this is the time whether he should be writing a cover story for us, putting things in a perspective, like history, what it is. So I would have reached out to him. I know I was complaining to him. He said no to me. Like,
I think that was a very good question, and there's no easy answer to that. But for example, since you mentioned digging, and I can't speak for everyone, but it was very simple how we did it. We don't allow opinion or comment, and we look at everything from the lens of the eyes of the law. And we actually had a lawyer who looked at it and found that there were 5 other major cases like this which have been taken up after the government passed the 1991 Places of Worship Act, which means all the cases that are being taken up by these courts are illegal, unless such time as the act itself is removed. This is something that the BJP MP Uma Bharti had said in 1991, saying that this is going to cause us a lot of grief, this act. And you may agree or disagree whether that has caused grief or not. But the fact is, I think it's very important to get facts across to people and then leave them to make that decision. That's certainly what I feel, at least.
On TV, we don't have inside pages, nor do we have endless online space. We deal in seconds and minutes. But I think something like this would be noticed because it's making the news, it's being discussed. So I think there would be space. There is space being given to all the digging. There is space.
Sometimes the mainstream media come up with that. The Times of India yesterday had a lead editorial which said in one line that all these cases that are being taken up by courts are illegal and the Supreme Court must put a stop to it.
That's absolutely something which is so clear, because you're also coming from that legal, it's.
You have talked a lot about the present scenario of journalism, how UAPA has been increasing in cases of sedition and how journalism is being stifled. But as all of us would like to know, we are going into the field of journalism. How do you see this landscape changing in the next 5 to 10 years? Also considering that Modi might win the next election. So how do you see the future of this for us?
By the way, Modi might win 2029 also. The way well, I think I have almost given up hope on the mainstream media, the legacy media. But I think journalism will be done by Article 14, News Laundry, News Minute, these small, no frills platforms, which are possibly they enjoy greater freedom and they are not under business pressure as much as the legacy traditional media. And we have enough of feisty journalists, so very strong editors, and I think the battle will be fought. So tough, but the journey will continue.
I mean, there is, see, let's not forget that we've, over the last, as I was saying, we've enjoyed some kind of democracies, freedoms, etc., etc. So there is definitely a lot of stake that has been built into the system. So it's not going to be so easy to just brush aside journalism. So there will be people who will resist. All these things are going to happen. So it's a challenge and it will continue. It will probably get more difficult, but definitely it will continue. So I think we shouldn't give up journalism if you are,
I'll say a couple of things. One, I think this I think this unrelenting focus on Modi, I don't entirely agree with, because whether he comes or whether he goes, Indian society at its core has a very illiberal, undemocratic approach to things. So whether it's Modi or the next person to come along, this is going to stay with us. So journalism is always now from here on is going to be a battle, far more than it used to be. Certainly in the times that we joined, it certainly was not like this. We were not struggling like this.
People wanted to talk to us.
People wanted to talk to you. People wanted to discuss. People were willing to listen. But now that isn't the case at all. And so you have also, apart from this, you also have to be prepared for lower salaries. I'm sorry to say that, but you have to be. Unless you want to go to the mainstream media and I hate to say again this, and be sold out, then there's no problem. I mean, there was a colleague of mine who runs a major television news channel, and he said how they were losing people. He said that's because news channels are just handing out big paychecks. I said, where are these people getting the money? We are struggling even for one. But that's the fact. So you have to decide what kind of journalism you're going to do. If you're fine with going with the flow, then there are lots of jobs for you. There's no problem. If you want to specifically be a journalist in following the old definition of journalism, is holding power to account, then you better be prepared for some serious compromises.
And you spoke about no frills journalism. Even the frills journalism, it's changing a lot. We're cutting a lot of frills. We don't have the same number of people in a television unit. You don't necessarily have your camera person and somebody to edit. It's just shrinking. You will all get jobs. It's just shrinking. And like when you can work with this, when you can file your story and everything, it's just, everything is shrinking. The frills, even in the frills traditional media, it's shrinking a lot.
Since you spoke about the importance of facts and how engaging with people in social media is very important, but what I see nowadays, if I try to engage with someone, that would be something as the recent controversy about Taj Mahal. What I get in reply, that was summed up by the director of Kashmir Files in a News Laundry interview. Your facts are your facts, my facts are my facts. So you are dismissing whatever I read in my history books or whatever someone like Dr. Guha has written about. So how to counter that? And secondly, what we have seen recently, that same thing about Taj Mahal and everything, whatever we thought it was a fringe theory, it's now coming into the mainstream, and everyone has to put out a story that this is false, but it stays in the narrative. So the narrative is being said by someone. There's no way out of it. So what could be done about these things?
This is a much larger question. It's very difficult to answer that, and I certainly have no answer. I believe that the battle is actually in the trenches at home, in your family WhatsApp groups. I think that is where the battle is, more than journalism. And journalism, yes, can help by doing that, by providing whatever, whether it's memes or things that refute that. And I certainly know lots of people who do that, who earlier would ignore their family WhatsApp group, but keep pushing this in there. And it may have no effect, but somewhere some people who are perhaps might be on the fence, it might convince. That is the only thing you can do. Otherwise, there is no clear answer.
I remember when Twitter first started, and much of our time, people in our editors in Delhi would see a tweet and take it as the gospel truth, that this is happening. I think it was Tirupati flooding. There was a tweet which showed absolutely covered with water. And I called people locally in Tirupati and they said, no, it's fine, water subsided, there's no problem. But still, I had to make the journey there, travel there, and show there is no flood, it's fine. We were so shocked that we had to spend our time contradicting, saying this is not true. Like you spoke about, we have to take the time to say this isn't true, which is something we never had to do before social media really blossomed like this. We were giving the details, but we didn't have to spend so much time and energy saying, don't believe that.
I think there are also elements, to my facts and are my facts, your facts are your facts. It's an important question because if you look at YouTube, and especially there are people who have become big celebrities by doling out stuff which are completely imaginative, but they have such huge following, and there's a lot of, in fact, in Tamil Nadu, I think recently somebody was hauled up and asked questions about something they had put up on YouTube. The point is, what we don't realize is if you look at the person who's doing this, and you find out, so why is he or she doing this? The reason for that is very simple. The more number of followers you get, beyond a point, you start earning a lot of money. People don't realize that. So there was a raid on this person who was putting out this fake YouTubes, not fake YouTubes with a lot of information, his own imaginative information. So they found out that he had earned about 4 crores or 5 crores just on a YouTube channel which he was running with, spewing these kind of.
That's a business
a
model that works.
So at the back end, there's a very, very clear-cut reason why many of them are doing it, and there's a lot of people are listening to it and thinking that that's actually the truth. So there is also this element to it.
It is a profitable business model, which none of you don't try that at home.
I would only say bottom line that you have to do your jobs as journalists. Society may change around you, and it's really society changes in degrees. We have seen all this before, even before the coming of social media. All of you here will remember. I'm not so sure many in the audience will remember the whole question of Ganeshas drinking milk. It was accepted as a fact that Ganeshas all over the country were drinking milk, and whatever you said,
we covered it.
Well, there you go. And then there's nothing you said would do that. I remember the late 19th century in America, there were these investigative newspapers which you call muckrakers. And muckraking did they did a lot of fine journalism, but a lot of it was just invented rubbish, and people believed it as the gospel truth. So this has always been the case. Human beings by nature are given to accepting things like this.
Don't believe everything in print that you see in print.
Yeah. So your job then and your job now, I think, remains the same. It's just a question of degree.
But apparently things have definitely become worse now, difficult. One reason, I happened to meet a very senior politician day before yesterday, and he told me something very interesting, and maybe we guys should actually check it out. He said, like, why have the owners come under so much of pressure? Or, like, they were earlier also under pressure, emergency and all, but it's become worse. So apparently ED and income tax laws have been changed, and now if say the ED serves you a notice that 100 crores you have defaulted or some allegation, so they don't have to wait for the judgment. That 100 crores or 200 crores, whatever the money is, can be immediately seized. So now the business, the owners have come under greater pressure. Like, they can be easily arm twisted. Like, it cripples you. Like, I'll seize 500 crores and then maybe we'll see later what happens. So things have become worse. This is something very interesting. I didn't know about it. So maybe worth looking at.
There was some tweak in the law which allows them to seize that.
Really?
Yeah,
so, and it has happened recently.
Yeah, I think the same thing happened with amnesty as well. The accounts were frozen.
So that's happening. So people are
It
scared.
doesn't matter that there is no crime there, and that all this, they may be held, that they are not guilty for anything at all. But the process, as we know.
So that is why the fear is more palpable now. Like even during emergency, we were crawling, but now it's not even crawling. We are, I don't know.
Now we're doing Shashtang Namaskar before anything begins itself, and we stay there. Yeah, absolutely.
So I was up for an interview very recently. So the very first question I got asked was, do I like capitalism or socialism? So when editors themselves are seeking out, whether what ideology I belong to, as an aspiring journalist, is it actually possible for me to stay true or stay objective when I'm covering or stories or doing stories?
It sounds like they were asking what kind of salary you would accept.
I'm not sure what the context was for that. Was that part of a job interview?
Yeah, it was. So basically, he looked at my resume and saw that I studied economics. And then he wanted to know whether I like capitalistic form of economy or a socialist form of
It may
economy.
just been a question to see how you respond.
I'm sorry?
It may just have been a question to you to see how you respond.
That might be true, but considering that was a 10-minute interview where 7 minutes he just refuted whatever views I had, I don't think it was just that.
No, it also shows the deep level of polarization that has happened. Today, it's you know, because that's the battleground going forward. It's going to become a really broadly a left versus right kind of battle. And we are seeing it across the world. It's not just in India. So the question that was asked was probably not a very surprising question.
A few years ago, in a very different stage, you said that many of the mills in Bombay only had 99-year leases on their property, but they were selling it, and that the Indian Express prevented you from publicizing that fact. I'm saying that in response to what you said just now. Has that fact been widely publicized since? This must have happened 30 or more years ago.
No, not 30, this was in the late 90s.
Okay.
No, the Indian Express did not stop you from publicizing that fact because there were a couple of my colleagues who had done terrific investigative work and had used the Right to Information Act to get the original leases from the mill.
Yeah.
And those are still, they're with me, in fact, written in beautiful longhand. They were all essentially 99. So I'm sorry, this will require 5 minutes to give a background. Should I? So, the mills in the heart of Bombay, the textile mills, when the era of the mills shut down, the government said this is terrific, and everyone realized that this is a fantastic piece of real estate in the middle of Bombay city, which was very shabby then, and of course continues to be. But this is a great opportunity to redevelop the city entirely. So Charles Correa, the famous architect, was tasked with this report, which finally said that 1/3 of these mills, since they're on lease, should stay with the mill owners since they've been using it for more than a century now, or about a century. 1/3 should be used for public housing, and 1/3 should be used for open spaces, parks, etc., which the city desperately needed. So we started reporting this, but so what happened then was the government, it was then a Congress NCP government, I think a Congress government, may not have been NCP or may have been NCP. They very quietly slid in a resolution called, and I remember, Development Control Regulation 33-2, which basically very quietly said, it was a small little paragraph which said that at the end of these leases, 90 to 98% of the mill lands will actually vest back with the owners, which essentially undercut Korea's plan entirely, which means they were going back. So obviously, as we learned subsequently, some hundreds of crores had changed hands, which is why they put in this regulation. So we were reporting on this, saying this does not make any sense because the law, the leases are very clear, that the government has all the power. These land will vest with the government at the end of these leases. It's straightforward. So, and you're losing a huge opportunity. We didn't say that. We simply reported this. So there was pushback then, of course, from editors saying that this is not what you should be reporting, because their point of view was that in the middle of some of the costliest real estate in the world, how can you have public housing and public spaces, which of course didn't make sense editorially, because the cities across the world have done exactly this, whether it's the docklands of London or anywhere else. So we agreed to disagree about that, and we ran all those stories, but at some point, I found that my situation would be untenable, and I was told that we should not run these stories any longer, at which point I quit.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Dakshin, Ruben, Samar. I really enjoyed that. And I think let's hold out some hope for Indian media. Thank you all for being here.
We extend our thanks and gratitude to Mr. Ruben Banerjee, Mr. KS Dakshina Murthy, and Mr. Samar Halarnkar, and of course Ms. Maya Sharma for gracing this event with their presence. As people starting in this field of journalism, I think today's event has definitely added valuable insights that will help us with this profession. I invite my fellow classmates to present a token of appreciation to our esteemed guests. Thank you everybody for taking out time from your busy schedules and attending today's event. Thank you.